Was
Hello and welcome everyone for another show of MEDtalkx Book Club. So today we've got a really interesting and very appropriate book to discuss. So this is a book called "The Between the World and Me," but just a little bit more about our book club. So it happens every Sunday, well, every last Sunday, I should say. I wish I could do it every Sunday, and this lasts for about an hour. Um, and we tend to usually take turns choosing a book, but obviously value any kind of input and guidance from the viewers and listeners about the books that we choose or should consider choosing. So you can follow us live on YouTube as well as Facebook. And, you know, just some book club rules for us to just be mindful of. Please try and avoid flaming guys. It's one of those topics today. But you know, we'll certainly try to discuss quite honestly about our thoughts about this book. So I'll just let Zubair and Fahim say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody.
hello and good evening to everyone. Thank you for tuning in and watching. We really appreciate your time.
Great. So, okay. So let's start a bit more about the book. So this book is written by Ta-Nehisi. I'm going to say Coates, but it may well be Coates. So it's called Between the World and Me. So it's a non-fictional account that was released back in 2015. So it's a very honest, lived experience of a man trying to communicate something to his son about illuminating his experience and ultimately the reader. So the topic appears to be pretty much about Black people in America. And the book was ranked actually 7th in the Guardian's list of 100 best books of the 21st century. So let's see where that sits as the 21st century continues. But it is a book that covers over 150 pages, journey of the writer, who's a father, husband, son, and a friend on racism in America. It pivots quite seamlessly, actually, between understanding the nation's history to the current crisis of racism. So it's very much vivid to all of us anyway, especially with what's happening in US of A. So the ease of which people are killed because of being from a black ethnic origin, and the way Black bodies were exploited, as how he says, through segregation, slavery, imprisonment, and being subject to murder in a very disproportionate way. He felt failure when he saw sorrow in his son's eyes. And certainly what we can take from this is it's a very honest appraisal of his interaction with his son and the importance of giving a certain narrative so that he can develop and make a change in the right way. So when he felt that failure, he wanted to do something about it. He gave the examples of his grandparents who never tried to console him with ideas of afterlife and how one had to lead and live in this life. So as I actually finished the book, I did actually feel quite exhausted. But at the same time, there was that huge element of sorrow. There was the anger and hospitality that he displays. There's examples of empathy and self-realization that he has never really experienced about the different worlds out there. So Barack Obama, interestingly, has met him, and he talks about the importance of empathy, that it actually is more of an organized principle, and without it, it gives us very limited vision. So he does say that he's marked with those codes which shielded him in one world and then chained him in the next. So again, the way he writes is very vivid. This is his call to free his son, to give him a very lived account and to use and change in the current state of affairs. So the reason why I chose this book was for that experience, to give a very real experience of someone from the United States, of how discrimination is explored and explained, especially from a father to his son. So I end my summary with a quote from his book, a call to how certainly I felt growing up, spending my childhood in Saudi Arabia, in India, then moving to UK at the age of 9. So a similar direction overheard from others, that from the same opportunities, you have to be twice as good, which is to say you accept half as much. So over to you, Zubair. What are your thoughts about this book?
Thank you, Mehran. Thanks for introducing his book so eloquently. It's a great read. It kind of, I love the fact that he talks in the first person throughout. So it's all about me and I, and the fact that it's about a message towards his son. So you really get to feel as though you're quite privileged to hear how him as a father is talking to his son and what his experiences have been throughout his childhood, adulthood, and how he's using that towards helping his son to manage and maneuver around America as a black man. When you read through it, there's an element of trying to find solutions. So usually when you kind of think of these books, you think, well, he's telling his son how things are. But in terms of aspiration, in terms of saying you can do X, Y, Z, you can be whatever you want to be, there was a great deal of that. But there was a lot more about how bad things are and just shaking the sort of shackles of childhood from his son and saying, you're going to be a man soon. And this the world you'll be growing into. So don't think it is going to be like this. What you see on TV isn't for you. Those manicured lawns, those events that take place on Memorial Day or whatever else, they're not for you. Your life is going to be this. Your life is going to be making sure you don't get your body shackled, and sort of quite strong terms in terms of being beaten up by somebody for being black. And I found that to be quite sobering, quite pessimistic in some ways, because there wasn't really much there about living a particular kind of way. And I love the fact that he talks about dreaming in there, but again, quite negative connotations. There's a dream that's in America that we've all heard of, the American dream, where you can be whatever you want to be if you try hard enough. But he's there saying to his son, actually, that's not for you. That's for somebody else. And that guy's from somewhere in Baltimore, or he lives in a sort of suburb somewhere in another part of the States, but he doesn't live in the inner cities like we do. He doesn't live in Chicago, New York, and he definitely isn't black. And I found that to be quite sobering, because whenever you think about America, it's always about the American dream. And here's somebody there saying, actually, that's not for us, guys. This is what, I mean, your quote was actually what, because I've heard that before from family before as well, that you have to try so hard to get to where you want to be. And even then, it only takes a little bit, and the fall can be quite substantial. Because there's always the element of you're the exception as opposed to the norm. So you've made it there because you've tried hard, but actually the rest of your people aren't great. The rest of your people are like this or like that. So it was quite sobering to hear how their experience there is in the States compared to our experience. But I mean, I'm not saying that I understand their experience at all. I mean, I'm still learning myself what the experience is like. But just to get that perspective from somebody writing when they had their first black president, I just find that to be quite shocking. I would have thought that he'd be saying, you know what, we've done it. We had this issue. We had Rosa Parks. We've had Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. We've tried everything. We've got Barack Obama now as our president. We've made it. And now you can be X, Y, Z. But it wasn't that. It was a case of, actually, no, we're not there yet, and we've still got a long way to go. So that was quite sobering for me.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Thank you for that, Zubair. What about you, Fahim? What's your take on the book?
Yeah, thank you, Mehran, for choosing this book. There was a lot to ponder over and reminisce and mull over. It's one of those books that I think actually stays with you after you've read it as well, which I can't say for every book I've read. No puns intended. Okay, so those of you watching regularly watch this book club will know what I mean. But no, seriously aside, it's a serious book. So Between the World and Me, you know, there's so many concepts that are going through the book, from obviously race, son to a father, father to son, whichever way you look at it. You're also looking at enslavement, of black people for a long period of time, wrongful incarceration, educational attainment, the black experience. It really is. You can look at it from many ways. Even growing up, I think, in urban America, you can look at it in that way as well. So in many ways, I found that writing the book as if it was father to son, it made me feel closer to the material in a way. It gives you that intimacy. So that's quite an interesting thing, because that's not a common experience I've had with books that are written in this way. One of the quotes I really liked, early in the book, he writes, "Race is the child of racism, not the father." Yeah, I don't know what you thought of that, guys, but I think that was a very intelligent quote, and really, that's the idea of race and how you can look. As I never looked at it in that sense, so it made me think a bit differently when I thought of that, and just exploring the African American experience, the Black American male experience that we've talked about, and this concept that's the sanctity of the black body. And the effect of racism, like you say, so in vivid physical terms. Another bit he wrote is, "And so enslavement must be casual wrath and random manglings, the gashing of head and brain blown out over the river as the body seeks to escape. There is no uplifting way to say this. I have no praise anthems nor old Negro spirituals. The spirit and soul are the body and brain which are destructive. That is precisely why they're so precious, and the soul did not escape." I mean, I could go on, but when you actually read this sort of thing, actually, in a way, it's sort of you just carried away by his writing. So really, I think in many ways the book left me with a lot of questions as well. Is it a book of hope or is it not? Okay, that's one of the things, and really, there's a lot of fear in the book. Just to talk about, obviously, it concerns fear and the haunting effect of violence, which, thankfully, I've not had much of that experience in growing up, but he obviously has. So really, it's tender when he does talk about his wife and his child in the book. It sort of gives a nice contrast to that. I think there's so many themes of that, but I don't want to talk much further, as we'll probably discuss other things. But in a nutshell, those are some of the things that came out of the book for me.
Yeah, so no, I fully agree, and that was actually going to be my opening point about the best bit of the book, because it's race is actually the father, and it just it just made me think, have we just got it completely wrong of how we try to understand, how do we try to address things such as racism? Because potentially by calling it out, you're actually calling it an issue and calling potentially further segregation, and all your kind of channels to address where the need is becomes very much, it's like a motorway with multiple lines, but they don't really converge and going to the same destination. They just could diverge quite easily. But it's I thought that point about race and what it actually means, it was quite poignant. What did you find was the best bit about the book, Zubair?
For me, I think I just prefer the personal touch. I prefer the fact that this is a letter, or a long letter, from a father to his son, and just that aspect of being a dad and being there and telling your son or your daughter, for that matter, what you think is going to happen, and having that honesty. Because a lot of times when I think about my kids, you kind of cocoon them, don't we? We don't tell them the bad things that happen. We tell them the nice things that happen. We say the world's, we tell them about the good things in the world and encourage them to do good things too. But we know that there's a lot of things that aren't right. There are things that are very wrong. And we want to cocoon them from that, protect them from that. But this is a case of a father saying to his son, actually, no, this is how things are. And just being really frank and honest with him. And I just found that quite brave. I found that quite refreshing, because you tend not to find many people who write in that manner, who write letters to their kids that aren't really about aspiring towards a particular ideal, but more about, life's actually quite bad. This is what happens, and this is your experience, and you're going to go through this, and I found that to be the best bit. Just the whole father to son thing, because there's a long history of people writing towards their kids, writing letters. We don't do it nowadays because we just talk or WhatsApp or whatever else. But historically, you'd probably write to your kids if they live further afield. But we don't really have that. But he's obviously made the effort to actually write to his kids, or to his son rather, and just be really honest with him about what he thinks he'll experience. And I think the best thing in that was the fact that he was honest with his emotions. There was an honesty with his emotions, with the content that he provided. So he wasn't, he kind of allowed his son to appreciate that being angry, amongst other things, being fearful, he can do that because his dad has let him do that. So I think if I was at that age and I was worried about certain things, I would think that if your parents could appreciate that emotion and maybe be refreshingly honest about it, maybe that might work. I don't know, but you just feel as though, thinking back about things that maybe we were worried about, if our parents maybe told us the same things and were sort of a lot more honest about how bad things can be, maybe it may have been helpful. But I don't know, it'd be good to see his son actually, to see what he thought of this, because I'd love to see his account and actually be like, you know what, because of dad, I get it, and I've actually learned this much. But I don't know if his son's actually written a counter to this, or maybe one day he might do. But if he hasn't, it'd be great to kind of hear his sort of reflections on this. But for me, that was the best part, the fact that it was all in the first person, from a dad to his son.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's something very old school about actually writing something again, isn't it? As you said, the way we communicate has really changed over the past 5 to 10 years, and him giving something that potentially just could be timeless for his son, for him to reflect something no one can erase it. It's his own lived experience. What about you, Fahim? What's the best bit for you?
Best bit, I think, is the topics he covers. So obviously, in light of the Black Lives Movement as well, he's talking about race or racism, and we've talked about which came first and the way he's looked at that. So for me, it was actually the content matter that he's getting into, and that is about also the concept of the dream. He doesn't call it the American dream because it's not for all Americans, and I think that's worth a bit of analysis, because we often think of it as the American dream, but he was trying to tell his son, it's not for you though. This dream is not an American dream. And the people who are dreamers, when you analyze dreamers, that means they're asleep. So they're asleep to the concept of racism going on around them. And so actually, when you tease out all these things in the book, it's very astute. In a way, like many good books, there are many layers to this book. I'm only choosing to pick out certain layers, but I'm sure people more proficient in reading books and analyzing them will have picked out even more layers. But this concept of how he's trying to explain what he sees as race and racism to other people, to his son, and really this concept of imparting the education. So he doesn't believe education is merely from school and other things. He feels there's a responsibility on him to educate his child via this book. And that's a very novel understanding, because many parents may not consider education of their child by writing a book for them. They may send them to a teacher, send them to a good school, pay for them to go abroad, go on something, many different things, but actually to send the time to write a full book for you to get educated, I think that's meritorious, along with other things. It's, first of all, it's meritorious. And so I really enjoyed him actually having the insight to do such a task and doing it.
Yeah. So I think that kind of takes us on to the next question, meaning, what's the thing we liked least about this book? And it was actually very hard. Some of the positive things sometimes could be seen as a negative. I guess I'm trying to think about it from his son's perspective. At the end of the 150 plus pages, I felt exhausted. So if and his son was 15. And we don't need to take it literally. He's probably trying to explain to the audience as well about his experience, but just the way he pitches his experiences, his vivid words. He's very graphic about the black body and how it's been disfigured, manipulated, strangulated. So it's all these kind of terms. It's I certainly wouldn't consider using that for my son, even when he's 15, let alone, probably when he's a bit older. So I think there's probably my approach may have been a lot softer. I don't know if that's right. I don't know if that's wrong. But I think I just had some difficulty coming to terms with some of the ways we tried to explain it. And this is not a book about hope. Even though there are some snippets, it's very much about his anger, about his experience, about actually that story and not being left behind because of the dream, the American dream, that he didn't want his son to be caught up in. So I was hoping that there might be an opportunity to actually give some framework, but maybe the framework was actually in the lived experience, and that should, provide ammunition. Maybe the wrong word, but certainly provide ammunition for his son to take forward. What about you, Zubair? The least bit.
I'd have to say, for me, it'd be mostly about the fact that at the end of it, I couldn't quite fathom solutions. So I sort of read it and I thought, well, you've given me all these problems that I'm going to face, but how do I actually solve it? So that paternal wisdom to say that actually all this will happen, but this is how you do it, and it'll be better tomorrow. There was none of that. It was very pessimistic in that way. And I don't know, I guess there's a role for pessimism, but if I was writing a letter for my kids, I don't think I'd replete it with pessimism. I might have some part of it in there to kind of advise them certain things. But I think to have the whole letter, the whole 150 pages or whatever else of the book, and at the end of it feeling, actually, life's not great, I don't think that would be something that I'd feel too comfortable with. But that's why I'm asking. It'd be lovely to hear what his son or his children felt of this book, because if they thought actually otherwise, then I've obviously got it very wrong. But for me personally, I wouldn't be too happy to have written this sort of book, because I would have thought that you've just lumbered your children with a huge issue in terms of what they're going to face. But in terms of giving them hope and, the sort of aspiration that it can be better, but also just the tools to manage it, I didn't quite see that there.
What about you, Fahim?
Yeah, I think at times he uses language which to refer to other Black people in a negative connotation without saying the word on live. I think you both know what I mean. Certain words beginning with N and things which I don't feel comfortable reading or saying. There's also a few things, minor things, like there's some blatant advertisement deals with certain sportswear manufacturers that are littered into the conversation. No need to describe those sort of things. Gives you that world of corporate America coming into his world, and they don't add to the story. So I found that superfluous. But I think I think it's just the case of really the negativity. It sort of echoes what Zubair is saying. Although that's real and authentic, and that's what you're going through, what are your solutions? And I think it's not just to think that. I think many critics of this book have thought that what are the solutions you're leaving at the end of this letter, at the end of the book, to forge a path forward? And in a way, even though it is a letter to his son, I accept that. I know that. In a way, it's sort of, he's explaining like his memoir, isn't it? If you look at it, it's what he's grown up, his life in Baltimore and Howard University and other things. So really, we can call it a letter, but really, if it's a letter, you'd mention the sort of things that happened to his child growing up. This happened during your American football game or baseball. There's none of that in there. So I think in a letter to a child, you'd probably mention things that are personal to that child, but really, it's all his stuff. So in a way, it's a packaged memoir said as a letter, and I think we can see through that, and that's fair enough if he wants to do it that way, but it's a packaged memoir which is being said that it's a letter.
I guess the thing is, as he's very articulate, he's very intelligent, he's very well read, it would be wonderful to actually see what he thought was a solution, because he may have a really great solution, but he's not really shared that. And I think that's basically the concern, that it's a case of he's got so many things that he can bring to the table, but for whatever reason, he doesn't believe that there's a solution. I don't know what it is, but he hasn't really conveyed that.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we do know about these terms about racism, microaggression, white privilege. I think these, institutional racism, systematic. I guess no one's really coined non-systematic racism, but you could certainly consider that as a definition. What's your take? Do you think there needs to be certain definitions? Because we've all, I guess I'm saying we've all kind of experienced some degree of ignorance from other people, and it can certainly come out in other ways. It may be beyond ignorance, and it's very difficult to kind of tease between the two. For me, I don't know what your thoughts are about some of these terms and how valid they are. So go on. I'll look to you, Fahim.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure who that was either. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Absolutely. If it's a free for all, that's fine. Okay. Yeah. I think race and microaggressions. I mean, as we said at the beginning, he's turned over my understanding of racism because of what we said at the beginning. But generally, yeah, it does exist, and microaggressions, obviously, where it's hard sometimes, isn't it, to say what is ignorance, as you said, and what is a microaggression. But I think when you see it, you know it. I think, and obviously it's a bit lived, so when you've had something racist done to you, when it's a microaggression, and really it's sometimes hard to explain, but like I said, you know it when you see it, or you know it when you feel it. So these sort of things, and I think we've talked about these things in the past, the concept of where are you from sounds like an innocuous question, but it invariably seems to be more non-whites than whites, doesn't it? So it can sometimes feel as if it's aimed towards you, and the answer isn't right until you give an answer outside of England. So obviously that's an easy way to explain an obvious one, I think, that may have had growing up.
What about you, Zubair? How will you tackle that?
No, it's the question about where you're from. That's a question that we've all get asked, don't we? And I guess the question is, who does it relate to? In terms of microaggression, I must confess that I'd not heard the term before until a few weeks ago, in terms of the way it's being used, and the term white privilege as well wasn't really on my radar up until quite recently. But I guess it's one of those things where what is it, and what does it mean? And like Fahim said, it's not quite clear cut. There is a dictionary definition that I can kind of pick out and use. And I guess people would say it's a lived thing. So if you've been through it, you know it, but if not otherwise. And I guess that's a challenge, is a case of how do you quantify something in that way? Because you can quantify crimes in certain ways, and the robbery is a robbery, and an assault is an assault. But how do you quantify these, and how do you make it so that it becomes apparent to the person who's receiving it, but also doing it? Because you might find that some people may have experienced microaggression and racism, but may not actually be too savvy to it, because they haven't really cottoned on to the fact that it's being done to them. Because it's not as if somebody will say to you, I'm sorry, but I'm racist, and I'm going to ask you this question for that reason. It doesn't work that way. But I guess if it happened that way, it makes it easier. But because it doesn't do so, you're second guessing the person's intentions. But it's a difficult one.
Yeah, no, I think I don't really want to use specifically white privilege as a foundation to these, some of the questions and the answers and the struggles that especially Ta-Nehisi experiences. Privilege, I guess, from my understanding, was regardless of what your socioeconomic status is, you get access to quality education, quality jobs, quality living environment. So I think there's clearly how he sees that all the people around him seem to be stuck. Growing up in Baltimore, So I think he makes numerous references throughout the book, and it's very much us against them kind of language when he actually talks about it. Sorry about that. So yeah, so I think that's my take on that issue. But on the foundation of it, why did he write this book? Was his son a metaphor? That's something I left towards the end of the book. I was left with. So I'll come to you, Fahim, with that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one about the son being the metaphor. Well, because obviously I said it's like a packaged memoir, didn't I? Which is for the audience and then written as a book. So it could be the son as a metaphor. Even you can read it as the son looking back at the father. Either way, I mean, I think it's an interesting way of writing a book and doing it in that way. And you know, in previous examples I've come across, they've been few and far between. I think the ones that I'm aware of in the Quranic experience with the Luqman and his son, and obviously you know, there's some sort of experience another. So it's an uncommon way of imparting wisdom, but it's dependent on the person giving the wisdom, isn't it? This condition, an opportunity of a father giving wisdom to the son. It sort of, there's an inherent understanding that I am wise, you are not wise. You will take from me to you. It's a clear transfer of mentorship, if you want, and guidance. And I think that's fair. That's how an adult with a child would think. It's just whether in modern times with reverse mentoring and information between generations back and forth, it's how much use this concept will be. And it's only written about 5 years ago, but already in 5 years' time, things have moved on quite a lot. I mean, when you look about the history of this book, I think it talks about one of his friends or colleagues from college who died, I think, and then that spurred him on to write this book. So really, is that the son? In a way, you think about what he would have talked to him if he'd still carried on living, because that was the time before his son came along. In my mind, but again, it'd be great to have the author with these situations, isn't it? To have them and explain. I would ask him that, you know, how much effect was he in your book? Are you talking about him as your son, really? Because he's no longer with you, whereas your son's always with you, isn't he? So, just another way of looking at it.
Yeah, I did ask him to come on, but, but I think he's probably tied up a little bit. Yeah, no, I think I certainly thought that some of his interactions with the media, for example, and coming away thinking that that he actually failed to get the message across. It felt a very much an anxiety-driven process that he thought, okay, you know what, I need to address this with my son because I'm not able to communicate it in a spoken way. Maybe he has tried to do that with his son, and I think there's countless examples that perhaps he didn't provide that kind of comfort because he shouldn't get that kind of comfort. But then he's trying to give a narrative as to why that is the case. So it felt as though he felt he had to explain himself. So that's kind of my take on it. But the son being a metaphor, I actually thought this was his throwback to Barack Obama after his meeting with him, and thinking, you know what, this is actually my take on it. And you might say don't despair, but people are despairing, and you're in a position of power, and you haven't really taken my account in its pure weight and form. So I think that was I guess his challenge to Barack, perhaps, as well as the establishment to actually think, you know what, there is a need. We need to do something different.
I guess with the Barack thing as well, obviously he wrote a book, didn't he? Dreams of My Father. So I probably, obviously this is a different title, isn't it? I think that the son thing, you can, because you, as parents, you talk to your children about things, but like I mentioned before, there are other educational tools available that we tend to use, which is traditionally schools, etc. But this is obviously a way of doing things that has a sort of historicity towards it. It has got a sort of a level of intellectual tradition and wise tradition towards it too. So I think it kind of harks back to the fact that kids are still kids and parents are still parents, because I don't believe that a child would write a letter of this description to their parents and say, this is what you do for me as a child. I've never seen a child writing it to their parents saying, you know, when I was 6, you did this to me. When I was 7, you did that to me. They've got to do this from now on. And this is how you should have been a parent towards me. They might argue with them and do other things, but I don't think it quite works that way. But I do, I mean, the other day I was talking to my family and spoken with my grandparents and my grandma, and just the whole thing about, you know, what the old people said was always had wisdom towards it, and it was true. So there's still a culture of, you know, from those from the regions of India, for example, to kind of say that what the elders say is true, and it's almost as though there's an element of infallibility towards what they say, and I guess this probably is looking towards that area, that what he's writing here, I think, is for his son, but I think it's also for the sons in America that maybe don't have a father figure, but it's also for the fact that this letter is for those that may come across it in 100 years' time, because this issue for him has been there since America's conception. We're now, 200 plus years down the line, we're still here. And he probably imagines that this will be the case in another century or 2 centuries. So if you're a black individual in 2120 or 2220, then this will be relevant to you, which is a bit sobering. But maybe that's what he's thinking about, that any child who is 15 or otherwise, but not just for now, but for the future, this is for you. This is one individual telling you, I know what you're feeling, and I know what you're going through, and it's not going to get any better.
Yeah, sobering thought there. But, you know, I think there has been a similar piece of work that was done before. I think James Baldwin wrote a letter to his nephew back in 1953.
Yep.
I think this was. I haven't had the pleasure of reading that yet, but maybe that's one of my to-do lists now. But certainly things haven't really changed. Maybe needs have changed. Maybe the focus has to be different, but people continue to experience the same kind of problem, the same degree of segregation. The inequality seems to be becoming even more apparent. So certainly I think that there's a certain value of this book and a certain, the rationale for it to exist. But how, and I think one of the reasons why I chose this book is because of the father-son relationship and, my relationship with my 2 boys, and talking about things such as racism. How would you approach it? I'll give you my take on it. Fahim, and I know you haven't had the pleasure of children yet, but you would have seen it with your nephews, and everyone has kind of an idea. Maybe that idea changes suddenly when children arrive, but certainly someone has a perspective on it. So what's your take?
I think talking about racism, it's an important topic. You can't mollycoddle children and infants and so on, and young people for life, and that's partly because of the world we live in. It's internet age, digital age. Information is everywhere. It wasn't like that when we were growing up. It was still quite hard to get information as quickly. We were going much more to the library to read a book to get the information than find out. So these concepts of racism are there, and people are going to get information from their friends, aren't they? They're affected by these sort of things. So if you're going to be an influencer on them, or influencers as they're called, aren't they, on the internet, you may as well take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and be an influencer and actually get down to the ground and actually do that job. But it's a tough discussion. It's not really a very easy one. I mean, I like one way he would play, sometimes we're just like Trivial Pursuit question, he said. and I used to play Trivial Pursuit, and the way he was basically saying is who's the first black of this, as if it's a Trivial Pursuit question, and it's quite interesting. And the way he looked at racism by talking about Howard university. I had never heard of Howard University. At first, when I saw it, I thought, did he mean Harvard? I've heard of Harvard. But then I did a second take. I know he meant Howard. And but it's an important university for Black people in Washington, I gather, where it's a crossroads, and a lot of them met there. And obviously he talks about Toni Morrison, the late Toni Morrison, and Toni Morrison endorses his book. So there's a lot of meeting places and these sort of things in terms of race. So I think he's well there in terms of knowing he's part of the discourse on race and racism in America as a journalist and an author. And so that gives him the credibility to talk about race and racism as well. I would say, I don't think every father has that level of credibility to talk about yeah. So that's the number one caveat is, do you have the credibility about what you're talking about? Do you have that lived experience? He talks about beatings he's had, I think, from his dad and other things. And he talks about college dropouts. I think, what is it in America, 40 to 60% end up being incarcerated if they drop out of college. So I learned something there. These are high percentages, aren't they, if that's true? So when you put it into that sort of a thing, I can't talk about racism to that level because I don't know it to that level. So I think part of his, the reason he's able to talk about it as well is he has all the knowledge on this topic. He's an expert in this topic. And so when you're an expert on something, it's easier to give out that information.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. How would you approach this topic with your children, Zubair?
It's a difficult one. Like Raheem mentioned, you want to prepare your kids as well as you can do, and you do things that you think are important. So we teach our kids certain things, and we've taught them things from a young age that we thought was important to us and we thought would be important for them. I guess these sort of issues are difficult to talk about. And again, because there's negativity around them and there's a lot of negative emotion associated with them, that conversation isn't easy. When you talk to kids and you teach them things, whether it's some sort of a language or to do with maths or a schoolwork or other stuff that they're learning, it's a lot easier because the subject matter isn't as emotive. Whereas if it's bullying, if it's issues with friends, whether it's issues of race, these are not easy topics. And I guess part of the issue is the answers aren't always easy. With certain things, there's a solution that's ready made that you can utilize, but in other areas there are solutions that aren't as easy. Because what is the solution towards racism? I don't think I know the answer to that question, although if you guys do. What is the solution towards addressing the issue? How do we get to a society where race is an issue, and not just that, but maybe other inequalities that we face or others face? And I guess that's the starting point, because as a parent, you want to tell your kids the best things that you can teach them. And if there was an issue around racism that you were hoping to teach them about, I'd want to make sure that I knew what I was talking about and I could help them navigate it. Now, I guess the other thing is that how important will it be to them? Right now, they've never experienced racism as far as they are aware of. They've never experienced it directly. No one's ever said anything to them. But if one day they were sadly to kind of get that experience, I'm sure they'd kind of discuss it, and hopefully we could discuss it then. But I think to have a preemptive conversation might be a bit tricky. But I guess if there was a situation where that arose, then that would be a starting point. And I guess the other thing is that as they get older, they will become more aware. They're only young yet, but as they get older and they're more aware of differences in different humans, the natural curiosity that they have will be a focus for conversations. And I guess that's what it is. It is a conversation. You will say things as a parent, they will reply, and you will ask them what they're feeling. And our experiences in the 80s will be different to what the experiences are now in the 2020s. So they will go through things differently than what we went through. Not only because we're further down the line, but the challenges that maybe we faced before aren't the same now. And events that have occurred since we were young are not what they are nowadays. So I think there's a lot to be said about the topic itself not being easy to broach, it being quite negative. I do think that it would be something you would want to discuss with them amongst other things, but I think I would wait for them to come to me and say that I've come across this issue, I've heard about this, Why is it that we're brown and other people are white, or other people are black, or whatever? And then have that conversation. So I would rather they came to me, and then we could then move on from there, as opposed to me saying, by the way, girls, this is how things are. There are people out there in the world who want the same color as you, the same race as you, and then people do this when that happens, and this is what you're supposed to do. Just because I think it's just quite a negative thing to discuss, really. And like I said, they are very young. And I guess if it came to a stage where they were approached, it was an issue for them now, I would definitely handle the issue accordingly. But if not, I would wait for them to become aware of it first. Because once they're aware of these things, and it's worthwhile then discussing with them, to protect them, but also to make sure they don't become engrossed in that aspect also, because I wouldn't want them to become imbibed with those sort of attitudes themselves. So it's a two-way street. But I guess I would wait for them to become more aware of those differences.
Yeah, and I certainly agree that you can't really preempt the discussion of racism, because it is profound, and yeah, as you know, we need to pitch it in the right way. I think at the foundation of it all, I think that the key thing I try to highlight to my kids is just everyone's different, but everyone is equal in so many other ways. So, you know, little things about time to play with toys, or time to do this, or time to do that. You have to be equal with how much attention you give to certain children, and things like that. So equality seems to be my focus, and certainly the topic of not highlighting race, because of being the father of everything that follows, has made it more important for me, probably not to just highlight specifically what it is, until someone comes up with the example of what I think may be actually racism. And I made a conscious decision, and both me and my wife made a very conscious decision, that he gets put in a school where the teachers know all the kids' names, and it's not just the class teacher, it's actually the full school, which is pretty amazing. And all the kids, which, you know, you don't really have that much control, but you realize that all the kids have many ethnicities, many, you know, differences in how they look and how they celebrate and how they interact. So the difference is there, and for them to actually experience it, you know what, this is actually very normal, which is what we thought was quite important. Time will tell, but we're just doing what we can with the limited time that we have. So I guess that moves to the next bit about what have we learned most from our fathers. Fahim, you wanted this question being added. So maybe you've got much more to learn from your dad.
Well, the advantage I have, I think you both know my dad quite well as well, so you can agree or disagree with a lot of the points. But I just look at it that way. I like to always reverse things and turn things around anyway and mull them over, and looking at the son, father. And so what have we learned from our fathers? Naturally, for me, it was a natural progression after reading this book. I've learned a lot. He's not in the room, so I'm able to say a lot of good things about him. But obviously, just the way to look at the world, treating people, getting a good range of friends, colleagues from different ethnicities, religions, so on. Being an open-minded, as you both probably know, not just with his blue hair and things, but he is quite open-minded in many ways that he takes on things, and you know, he's able to laugh at himself, which I try and do, and things. You've got not take myself too seriously, and there's just so many things. Obviously, just love of literature, geography. I mean, the things that, because part of this is obviously, like I said, the concept of a father giving knowledge to their child. So hopefully the next generation will do better than their generation. But I'm very skeptical. I'm not sure I'm doing better as a person than my father was, and I think that's the sadness in this, is we assume that every generation will do better. I'm not sure I would be a better father than my father is, or I would even have the achievements that he's achieved. And that's not how you measure achievements. There's many ways: financial, educational, enlightenment, different ways you can measure that. But you know, that's me being honest. So there's a lot to learn from the older generation, whether it's parents, grandparents, and really, it's a blessing if you still got grandparents. I've lost mine, so I mean, if you just take it one generation back, but really, I learned many things from them, and I have the disadvantage of no longer having them. So if anything, these things it's a real strong rally cry to maintaining family ties. in many ways. It's what you learn from your family. And one of the things, I don't want to be too critical of the book, is that there's a lack of black women, isn't there, in the book? I mean, everyone is surrounded by women generally in their family, but where's the black women and the strong role models? And I thought that was a bit disappointing, because really, yeah, we can learn from fathers and mothers, and it would have been nice to have heard all the things that maybe aunts, mothers, and so on taught us.
What about you, Zubair?
It's a long list. No, I don't know. It's difficult to quantify, because, as Fahim mentioned, it's not just the dad; it's the mum, and it's not just the mum and dad, but it's everybody else. I vividly remember things that my uncles, my aunts, my grandparents, my sisters, I can go back and have taught me, and to this day, I am indebted towards all of them. But in terms of just the father figure, I guess it's a softer things, isn't it? It's not what's the capital of Peru, or who was the first man on the moon. It's more the softer things, like Fahim mentioned about, what is it to be a person? What is it to be human? What is it to be Muslim? What is it to be a male? What is it to be a father? What is it to be a son? How do you approach things in life? How do you go around navigating the challenges, the opportunities that exist in life? And I think those are the things that I would probably say were the things that I got from him. I still get from him, rather, because even to this day, I tend to consult them on things, for better or for worse, and get their words of wisdom, so to speak, on matters. And it's always interesting, because one thing that became apart as the years went on is that my parents more and more would say, well, what do you think? Well, why just do that then? As opposed to do this. So instead of me going with an issue saying, what do you think I should do? And they were like, do that, or do this, and do this. It was more about, well, what do you think? Okay, do that. That's fine. So there was that element of building trust in your own judgment and taking ownership of what you're doing. But for them to kind of just take a step back. So although they're still in the loop, and they can still safeguard from rash decisions, for example, or mistakes, those sort of things. Obviously, my dad's quite, he enjoys his religion. So that was a big thing, big part of him and of our brick ring. So I think will always be a thing that I'll always take from him, because I don't think that can never be taken lightly or repaid, because that's quite personal. And I think for that to have been a strong part of my bringing, I think really helped, not just then, but also going forward. That sort of having that sort of tent over my head, so to speak, of knowing where the boundaries lay and what was right, what was wrong, was really useful then as it is now. But yeah, he doesn't dye his hair blue like Fahim dad does. And I think I always wonder what it would be like to have Fahim as my dad. Whether I'd be the same or whether I'd be different. But I don't think he'd be remiss of us to say that I think Fahim will make a great dad when he does eventually take that plunge. And I think he's already a great uncle to our kids, and I'm sure he is to other kids as well. But yeah, like it's difficult, isn't it? It's a good question to ask for him, but it's a difficult one to answer.
Mehran, your turn. You can't get away from this.
I'm being mindful that we're running out of time.
We've got time for this. We've got time for this.
No, it's as you both know, my dad as well. He's obviously came from very humble roots. My granddad, who still talks about even to this day from people that I interact with. So how do you measure success? I guess legacy is probably the word I'd use. And you can create a legacy in so many different ways. I think what my dad taught is about the need for progression, and I think he was brave enough but conscious enough that he was leaving his family behind. So he still continued to maintain those links, provide support where it's about emotional or financial, but it's just not his family, but also making sure his relatives, and because poverty unfortunately is a very common thing in India, and no matter how you progress, and again it's very self-professed kind of way of explaining it. Progression meaning only time will tell whether you progress, but certainly just making sure that you continue to create those avenues, those channels to support other people. So I think he made it very clear to me, not by words, but more by action. And I think that's quite humbling, quite sobering. And I think that's where the importance is. And I think that the way he interacts with my kids, and it's very difficult just talking about my dad, because obviously my mum played a huge part. She was the one that educated me in essence, not just from sitting down, going repeatedly through the times table in India as it was, but also just about values and again her interactions with her family and extended family. So I think all the things that you observe and then you take on, and continue to be a source of consolation, a source of guidance, even to this day. And I think we can never underestimate the value of wisdom, the value of parents. And you made reference to parents earlier about Luqman, peace be upon him, and his son. So clearly value of parents was pretty much top there in his kind of advice, but then at the same time it's about being patient, and be just. I think those were some of the key themes that I learned from my dad. And time will tell what I've learned. Clearly, we'll probably need to have a show with just our fathers and get them to sit there and ponder. But it's a very it's an area that will continue to evolve. It's very difficult to actually say that I fully get my dad, because with age and with how things are done, there's obviously value, and age should never stop you consulting your parents. Okay, so I think we are running a bit out of time, but should we go on to the out of fives, guys? Ratings out of five. So I'll start with you, Fahim. It's out of
4
five.
out of 5. 4 out of 5 for me, an easy 4. Really good. I thoroughly recommend it, and 4 means it's great for anyone to read. And yeah, I'd read it again.
Yeah, there you go. Zubair?
I'll give it a 4. It gives a really good account of what he thinks is important. He's poetic. There's some quotable quotes. It covers a wide range of issues that are important to him. I would have loved it if he kind of had something in terms of solutions, but that's just personal preference. But it was an honest account. He didn't cushion his words. He just said what he thought. He made it really raw and honest. And I thought that was really quite refreshing, because you don't see that very often.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I'm going to give it a 4, and I'll put this quote because I think this is something that resonates, the importance of fatherhood. So this is how, I think it's page 111. I do not want to raise you in fear or false memory. I did not want you forced to mask your joys and bind your eyes. What I wanted for you was to grow into consciousness. I resolved to hide nothing from you. So ran out of characters there, but that's in essence what he's trying to say. So as I said, it's a very honest account, not just pragmatic, but it's a clear connection that he had with his son and wanted to establish that. So I thought, it certainly gives me something to think about the role of a father and communicating things with his son. So there you go. So I think 12 out of 15, probably our strongest book so far. But Fahim, do you want to introduce our next book?
Yeah, I'll briefly just introduce it. Next one, The Namesake. I think for many people of a South Asian background, this was essential reading growing up. Winner of the Pulitzer Prize, Jhumpa Lahiri is world famous. And really, it's without spoiling too much. It's really, I think, in many ways, what other things have lended itself, from Mississippi Masala to you've got Baji on the Beach, you've got East is East, West is West, Goodness Gracious Me, so many things, but they all start from The Namesake, really. Made into a really good film, obviously, with the late Irfan Khan as well. So many things to tackle, which are still relevant now as they were when they were written back in 2003. The Namesake should be awesome. Maybe this week's ratings, let's see.
Okay, fantastic, great stuff. So thank you again, Zubair and Fahim, for sharing your time on a Sunday evening, and we look forward to having you on again for last Sunday of next month. So I think it's Sunday, August the 30th, 8 p.m. We'll be discussing Namesake. Thank you again. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Take care.
Good
Bye-bye.
evening.